Imagine walking into your local bank, making a standard deposit, and just, being guaranteed a 20% return in US dollars.
Right, which sounds completely absurd.
It sounds like a Ponzi scheme. I mean, it sounds highly illegal. But today, we're going to show you how the Reserve Bank of India is actually using this exact mathematical glitch in the matrix to save the national currency.
It is a wild mechanism, yeah.
Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive or 3D Initiative of UPSC with Saurav Kaushik. I am beyond thrilled you are joining us today. We have a monumental stack of material pulled directly from the June 12, 2026 UPSC Current Affairs Notes.
And it is a heavy stack.
Oh, it really is. 10 incredibly dense, high-stakes topics spanning from global maritime war zones to, well, the very definition of who we are under the Constitution.
It's a phenomenal lineup. But the mission here isn't just to recite 10 news items to you. Our goal is to really extract the absolute gold from these sources.
Exactly, the hidden structural mechanisms.
Right, the why for your general studies papers 1, 2, and 3. We want to map out the hidden architecture of these events, showing you how macro-level geopolitics basically crash directly into micro-level human realities, and do it without drowning you in raw data.
Because we are doing the heavy lifting to find that connective tissue for you. And we're going to start right inside the most micro-level reality there is, which is the home.
The absolute foundation.
Right. I want to unpack this landmark Supreme Court judgment delivered on June 11, 2026. This case actually originated from a motor accident in Punjab way back in November 2001.
A 25-year legal battle.
Yeah, 25 years over a single profound question. How do you calculate the financial value of a human life when that person didn't draw a formal salary?
And the pre-2026 legal framework had a very grim, almost insulting answer to that question.
Insulting is the right word.
Yeah, if a homemaker was tragically killed, the Motor Accident Claims Tribunal, or MACT, would typically calculate compensation by just looking at the state's minimum wage rates for unskilled labor.
Unskilled labor. For someone managing an entire household.
Exactly. So courts were routinely pegging the value of a homemaker at a paltry 7,000 to 10,000 rupees a month.
That is just shocking.
It is. In this specific case, the tribunal had awarded the family 8.43 lakh rupees in 2023. But the Supreme Court bench, with Justices Sanjay Karol and N. Kortiswar Singh, they took one look at this and enhanced it to 62.78 lakh rupees.
Okay, wow. That is nearly a 7-fold increase. But wait, before we get to the philosophy of it all,
yeah.
Mechanically, how are they arriving at these numbers? I mean, I've seen the phrase multiplicand multiplier method thrown around in these MACT cases.
Right. It sounds complicated, but let's break the math down because it is crucial for understanding judicial governance.
Please do.
So the multiplicand is the base annual income of the deceased. And the multiplier is a number usually between 5 and 18, depending on the victim's age, which accounts for their remaining working years.
Okay, so you just multiply the two to get the base compensation.
Exactly. And previously, courts used that 7,000 monthly unskilled wage as the multiplicand. But what the Supreme Court did here was establish a national benchmark. They fixed a minimum notional monthly income of 30,000 rupees for assessing a homemaker's services.
Notional income, meaning an imputed value assigned purely for the sake of the calculation, because obviously there are no pay stubs.
That is the functional aspect of it, yeah. But the truly groundbreaking element is how they justified it. The court ruled that loss of domestic care must now be treated as a distinct, independent head of compensation.
So it can't just be quietly swallowed up under vague legal categories like loss of dependency anymore.
Right. And during the hearing, Justice Karol made this striking observation. He stated flat out that homemakers are nation builders.
I read that quote and it genuinely gave me pause. I mean, naming the invisible labor, it completely flips the script. But there's a specific economic theory the bench drew upon, right? A.C. Pigue's paradox of household labor.
Yes, Pigue's paradox.
Let's slow down for a second and explain this, because this concept completely broke my brain when I first read it.
It's a foundational critique of how we measure the gross domestic product. So the classic illustration goes like this. Imagine you hire a cook and a housekeeper to manage your meals and your home.
Okay, got it.
You pay them a salary. That economic transaction is recorded, it's taxed, and it actively adds to the nation's GDP. Now imagine you marry that cook.
Okay, taking a romantic turn.
Right, but they continue to do the exact same physical work every single day, but now they do it for free. Because no cash is changing hands, that labor suddenly becomes economically invisible.
So the GDP actually shrinks.
Exactly. The GDP shrinks, even though the exact same productive work is still happening inside the house.
Let me get this straight. The exact same physical labor is happening. The meals are cooked, the floors are clean, the budgets are balanced. But just because there's a wedding ring instead of a paycheck, the global economic system pretends the value just vanished into thin air.
That is the paradox. It reveals the massive blind spot in the UN system of national accounts, which currently entirely excludes unpaid domestic and care work.
That completely shatters how we understand economic growth.
It really does. And the Supreme Court judgment essentially calls out this absurdity. Think about the sheer volume of work a homemaker executes. You have nutritional planning, early childhood education, elder care, crisis management, basic household logistics.
Yeah, if a family in a metropolitan area had to actually outsource all those specific functions to individual professionals, I mean, it would cost anywhere from $50,000 to $1 lakh a month.
Easily. And we have the data to prove who is carrying this burden. India's National Time Use Survey shows women spending roughly 7.5 hours a day on unpaid domestic work.
7.5 hours, and for men?
Just 2.5 hours a day.
Wow. So you have this massive, unacknowledged structural pillar holding up the entire formal economy.
Exactly. And if we extrapolate this from a GS Paper 3 perspective, economists estimate that if India actually incorporated unpaid care work into its formal economic metrics, it would boost the reported GDP by 15 to 25% overnight.
That is staggering. So this 30,000 rupee baseline isn't just about motor accidents.
No, not at all. It implicitly complements current women's empowerment initiatives, like the Lakhpati Didi scheme. It actively challenges the deeply ingrained social norm that women's domestic labor is just this infinite free resource.
Right. Well, we just talked about securing the invisible economic lifelines inside the home. But let's look at what happens when the actual physical lifelines supplying those homes are severed.
The global supply chain.
Exactly. Because if you want to see macro-level geopolitics crashing into daily life, you just have to look at the Strait of Hormuz.
The situation in the Persian Gulf is really escalating into a textbook geopolitical crisis. On June 11, the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet attacked a third vessel carrying Indian seafarers.
A third one.
Yes. This is part of the naval blockade the U.S. initiated against Iranian ports back in February 2026.
India's foreign policy here feels like trying to defuse a bomb. Like, the red wire is our energy supply, and the blue wire is our defense partnership with the U.S.
That's a great way to put it.
We have 240,000 seafarers out there on the oceans. We are highly dependent on the oil coming through Hormuz, but we are also strategic friends with both Washington and Tehran. How do we navigate this without something blowing up in our faces?
The variables are incredibly volatile, to say the least. First, you have to look at the energy dependence. India imports about 40% of its oil and a staggering 80% of its LPG through this specific strait.
80%?
Yeah. So even with our recent efforts to diversify our energy portfolio, Hormuz remains an irreplaceable artery for the Indian economy. Second, you have the human element. India has the world's second largest pool of seafarers.
Right. Our citizens are physically on these ships.
Exactly. Between March and June, an estimated 40 to 50 Indian citizens have been caught on vessels that were interdicted, stranded, or outright attacked. Thankfully, the Ministry of External Affairs confirmed the crew in this latest June 11 incident are secure, but the vessel itself was disabled.
But I really need to understand how this blockade actually works legally. I mean, the U.S. is enforcing this maximum economic pressure. But under UNCL, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, isn't there Article 87, which guarantees freedom of navigation on the high seas?
Yes, there is.
So how can a single navy just decide to shut down a global choke point and target civilian merchant vessels?
Well, that is the exact core of India's diplomatic grievance in UN forums right now. Imposing a unilateral naval blockade against civilian vessels in international waters stretches the boundaries of maritime law to the absolute breaking point.
It seems like it outright violates it.
Legally, many argue it does. However, the geopolitical reality is that the U.S. has the physical naval capacity to enforce it. And in response, Iran has mined the approaches to the strait and harassed passing tankers. So India is walking a razor-thin tightrope here.
Because of the Quad, right?
Right. We have a deep structural defense partnership with the U.S., the Quad, the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement.
So we can't come out swinging and publicly condemn the U.S. military actions without severely damaging that alliance. We have to stick to careful, sanitized language about being concerned and urging that civilian vessels shouldn't be targeted.
Exactly. But leaning too far toward the U.S. alienates Iran, and Iran holds the keys to the Chabahar port.
Chabahar. which is our multi-million-dollar strategic gateway to Central Asia, deliberately designed to bypass Pakistan.
Precisely, which brings us to the UK and France-led Hormuz Security Initiative. It's a coalition of over 40 nations aimed at ensuring safe navigation through demining and naval escorts. And India has been formally invited to join.
But joining a Western military escort coalition inside the Gulf found, that feels like walking into a trap. If the Indian Navy starts actively escorting ships through a U.S.-enforced blockade zone, Tehran will instantly view that as a hostile, anti-Iran posture.
And Chabahar port goes up in smoke.
Exactly. But if we stay out and more Indian seafarers are injured or killed, the domestic outrage will be catastrophic.
It is a severe strategic bind. Currently, India is limiting its involvement to diplomatic consultations and relying on Operation Urja Suraksha, which is our independent naval deployment launched in March.
Okay, independent deployment. So what does that mean on the ground?
It means the Indian Navy is escorting Indian-flagged vessels in the Arabian Sea, but they were deliberately stopping short of fully integrating into the Western coalition inside the highly contested waters of the strait itself.
Man, when historical alliances and geographical realities create these impossible middle grounds, someone always gets caught in the crossfire. And speaking of impossible middle grounds in historical categories, that dynamic isn't just happening on the high seas, it is happening right here in our own constitutional framework. Let's look at the Justice K.G. Balakrishnan Commission report.
This is a monumental issue for General Studies Papers 1 and 2. It touches on Indian polity, social justice, and the very definition of who actually qualifies as a scheduled caste.
Right.
The Commission finally submitted its report in late May 2026, dealing with the highly polarizing demand to extend SC status to Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims.
To understand why this is even a debate at all, you have to go back to the Constitution's Scheduled Caste Order of 1950. Originally, this presidential order restricted SC status exclusively to Hindus.
Yes, exclusively.
Then it was amended in 1956 to include Sikhs, and again in 1990 to include Buddhists. But Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims have remained completely excluded. The argument from their side is that these communities converted away from Hinduism specifically to escape the caste system.
Right.
So my question is, and this is what the commission was looking at, if you convert to a new religion, does the discrimination actually vanish? Or does the reality on the ground tell a completely different story?
Well, the sociological reality is often starkly different from the theological ideal. The Balakrishnan Commission conducted extensive field surveys across 23 states.
That's massive.
It is. They studied Catholic, Church of South India, and Pentecostal denominations, as well as Dalit Muslim communities like the Rangrez and Halalkor. And their preliminary findings suggest that caste-based discrimination and untouchability persist severely post-conversion.
Really? Even inside the new religious frameworks?
Yes. In many rural areas, there are separate cemeteries, separate seating in places of worship, and massive barriers to intermarriage. This essentially proves that caste is a deeply entrenched sociological phenomenon across the subcontinent, not just a Hindu theological construct.
Which brings us to the Supreme Court. There is a 5-judge constitutional bench waiting for this very report. They are looking at Article 341 of the Constitution. If the discrimination is demonstrably the same, does excluding someone purely based on their religion violate Article 14, the right to equality, and Article 15, non-discrimination?
And the constitutional arguments are robust on both sides. Proponents, including various Dalit rights organizations and the United Christian Council of India, they argue that reservation is a reparative tool for historical and ongoing social discrimination.
Makes sense.
Right. So if the discrimination survives the baptism or the conversion, denying the protective umbrella of SC status is constitutionally unjust.
But there is massive opposition. And it isn't just ideological, right? It's highly mathematical. Let's talk about the Indrasani judgment.
Ah, yes. The 1992 Indrasani judgment established a hard 50% ceiling on total reservations for SC, ST, and OBCs combined.
So it creates a literal zero-sum game.
Exactly. You have an estimated 1.5 to 2 crore Dalit Christians and 6 to 8 crore Dalit Muslims. If you suddenly add up to 10 crore people into the existing scheduled caste category without increasing the overall quota pie, the competition for the exact same number of reserved educational seats and government jobs just skyrockets.
So existing Hindu, Sikh, and Buddhist SC communities are understandably terrified of their representation being severely diluted.
Yes. Plus, organizations affiliated with the RSS argue that extending the status would actively incentivize religious conversion by removing the social penalty of losing SC benefits. Yes.
It is an incredibly delicate balancing act for the state. And when you have 8 core people fighting for constitutional recognition, their loudest voice is almost always civil society.
Absolutely.
You need NGOs and activists operating freely to even have this debate in the public sphere. But right now, the financial oxygen that keeps those NGOs alive is being systematically choked off.
This brings us to the intense debate surrounding the 2026 amendments to the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, or FCRA. To really contextualize this for governance and fundamental rights, we have to look at the trajectory of the law.
Okay, let's trace it back.
The FCRA was originally enacted in 2010 to regulate foreign money flowing into India, ensuring it isn't used to undermine national security. Then there was a major overhaul in 2020 that really tightened the screws. It forced all NGOs to use a single state Bank of India branch in New Delhi and capped administrative expenses at 20%.
But this new 2026 amendment bill, which I know is currently deferred due to massive pushback, it takes things to a completely unprecedented level. The bill proposes a designated authority capable of immediate asset takeover.
The mechanism here is what has civil society so alarmed. Under this provision, if the government merely suspends an NGO's FCRA registration pending an investigation, this new designated authority can immediately step in and take over the management of the NGO's foreign-funded assets. And they can dispose of the assets or direct their transfer to the Consolidated Fund of India.
Let me stop you there. What exactly is the Consolidated Fund of India, and why is an NGO's bank account or their office equipment being absorbed into it before they are even found guilty of a crime?
So the Consolidated Fund of India is essentially the government's primary bank account. All revenues received by the government, all loans raised, all state expenditures, they all flow through it.
Okay.
By transferring an NGO's assets here during a mere suspension period, the state is effectively executing a financial death penalty before any judicial trial has even concluded.
That is wild. Imagine a landlord legally changing the locks to your apartment, seizing your laptop, and selling your furniture to pay their own mortgage just because they suspect you violated a noise ordinance in the lease.
Right.
You haven't seen a judge. You haven't had a hearing. That is what this receivership feels like to these organizations.
Exactly. Furthermore, the bill dramatically expands the definition of a key functionary. It holds trustees, partners, and, quote, any person in a position to control or influence the management, unquote, personally liable for violations.
That is extremely broad.
It is. But the most significant structural change is the federalism clash. The 2026 bill mandates that any law enforcement agency, even state police departments, must obtain prior approval from the central government before initiating any FCRA-related investigation.
Wait, so if the police in Kerala or Tamil Nadu suspect an NGO of financial crimes locally, they can't even open a file without asking New Delhi first?
Yes. The central government argues this provision is actually a safeguard. They claim it prevents local authorities from going on fishing expeditions or harassing legitimate NGOs for petty local political reasons.
I mean, sure, that's their stated reason.
However, critics argue this completely centralizes enforcement. It gives New Delhi the exclusive power to act as a gatekeeper, essentially shielding NGOs that align with the center's ideology while relentlessly pursuing those that dissent, entirely bypassing state autonomy.
And we are seeing the chilling effect in real time. Before the 2020 amendments, there were around 22,000 NGOs with active FCRA licenses. Today, out of 3.3 million registered NGOs in the country, only about 17,000 can legally receive foreign funds.
It's a massive drop.
Global metrics like the VDEM Democracy Index have consistently flagged this deterioration. We are talking about organizations that rely on the 19,000 crore rupees that flows into India annually to fund child rights, education, environmental protection.
The deferral of the 2026 bill shows that democratic friction is still present, thankfully. But the overarching trend is undeniably clear. The state is systematically fortifying its internal administrative borders against foreign influence. Interestingly, though, while it restricts the flow of capital internally, it is deploying massive capital to conquer physical borders externally.
I love that transition from the administrative borders of civil society to the literal physical borders of the Himalayas. This brings us to the Zohila Tunnel breakthrough achieved on June 9, 2026.
For civil engineering and defense infrastructure under GS Paper 3, this is a watershed moment. A breakthrough, in tunneling terms, is the moment when the excavation teams, drilling blindly through the mountain from opposite sides, finally meet in the middle.
That must be an incredible feeling.
Oh, absolutely. Union Minister Nitin Gadkari was present at the Eastern Portal to witness the final blast that connected the 13.14-kilometer main tube.
I cannot overstate the madness of this engineering feat. They are punching a 13-kilometer hole through the Himalayas at an altitude of 11,500 feet.
It's breathtaking.
They are using the NRI, the new Austrian tunneling method. Can you explain the mechanics of this? How do you dig a hole in some of the most geologically unstable, freezing rock on the planet without the whole mountain just crushing you?
The genius of NATM is that it actually uses the inherent geological stress of the surrounding rock mass to stabilize the tunnel itself.
What do you mean?
Instead of building massive, rigid steel support structures immediately, they excavate a small section and then rapidly spray a layer of concrete, called shotcrete, directly onto the raw rock walls. Then they install rock bolts to pin the layers together.
Oh, wow.
This allows the mountain to deform slightly and settle into a new, stable arch. It is incredibly delicate work. They were moving at a brutal crawl, sometimes just 2.5 meters a day, battling massive water ingress and sub-zero temperatures.
2.5 meters a day. But they didn't spend 6,800 crore rupees just to show off their engineering skills.
Yeah.
This is about national survival.
Yes, it is.
The Zojila Pass connects Srinagar to Leh. And every single year, from November to May, snow and avalanches completely bury the pass. For half the year, the entire Union territory of Ladakh is severed from the rest of India by road.
And the strategic vulnerability of that isolation is terrifying. Think about our forward military deployments along the line of actual control. We're talking about friction points like Galwan, Pangonso, and Depsang. For 6 months, supplying those troops requires relying almost exclusively on expensive, highly vulnerable airlifts.
And we saw exactly how vulnerable that is during Operation Sindoor in May 2025.
We did. The India-Pakistan military skirmishes during Operation Sindoor proved that aerial supply lines are fragile. Bad weather grounds, cargo planes. Modern anti-aircraft systems make supply flights high-risk targets. You simply cannot sustain a prolonged military engagement relying on helicopters.
So the Zohila Tunnel changes the strategic calculus completely.
Completely. It cuts the travel time across that treacherous stretch from nearly 4 hours to just 15 minutes.
That is insane. 15 minutes. And when you link Zohila with the operational Zimur Tunnel and the Adal Tunnel, you finally have an all-weather, year-round surface corridor from Jammu straight to Leh.
Exactly.
But let's bring this down to the civilian level for a second. Imagine you live in Dras or Kargil. When winter hits, the cost of basic goods, fuel, rice, medicine, it skyrockets by 300% because it all has to be flown in.
It fundamentally alters the economic destiny of the region. A medical emergency in January no longer means hoping the weather clears enough for a helicopter evacuation. Now, you can put the patient in an ambulance and just drive them through the mountain to a hospital in Srinagar.
That's life-changing,
Yeah.
literally. But, building these 6,800 crore mega projects requires immense national wealth and a very stable currency to pay the contractors and import the machinery.
It does.
Which brings us back to the hook I mentioned at the very start of the show. If the global economy is shaking, how does the Reserve Bank of India magically generate 20% returns on U.S. dollar deposits to keep our currency afloat? Let's look at the FCNR deposit rates.
This is an absolute masterclass in macroeconomic defense mechanisms. So FCNR stands for Foreign Currency Non-Repatriable B Account. It is a specific type of fixed deposit designed for non-resident Indians. Crucially, the account is maintained in a foreign currency, like U.S. dollars. So the NRI depositor takes on zero exchange rate risk. When the term is up, they get their exact dollars back plus interest.
Okay, so right now, Indian banks are offering a base interest rate of around 8.5% on these dollar deposits, which is already incredibly aggressive compared to standard U.S. money market rates.
Very aggressive, yeah.
But 8.5% is not 20%. I am looking at these numbers and my brain is just breaking. Where is the rest of this free money actually coming from?
The secret ingredient is the forward premium on the Indian rupee, and it requires understanding currency swaps. Right now, the rupee is under severe depreciation pressure, trading weekly in the 95 to 97 per U.S. dollar range.
Okay, so it's weak.
Yes. The RBI desperately needs a flood of U.S. dollars entering the Indian banking system to bolster its foreign exchange reserves and stabilize the currency.
So the RBI essentially tells the banks, go solicit dollars from the diaspora, offer them that 8.5% base rate. And to make it irresistible, we, the central bank, will subsidize a forward dollar-rupee swap.
The mechanics work exactly like this. When an NRI deposits $100,000, they simultaneously enter a forward contract to sell rupees back into dollars at a future date. Because the global market expects the rupee to be weaker in the future, that forward contract carries a premium. Currently, that premium is massive, around 12 to 14%. When you add the guaranteed 8.5% bank interest to the 14% forward premium, the all-in annualized return for the NRI hits an astronomical 20 to 22%.
It is the ultimate arbitrage. I mean, it is basically risk-free for the investor.
Yeah.
But who is paying the bill for that 14% premium? Nothing is free.
You're right. The Reserve Bank of India is paying for it directly out of its own balance sheet.
Wow.
This is a calculated high-stakes gamble. The RBI is executing the exact same playbook that former Governor Raghuram Rajan used during the taper tantrum of 2013. Rajan's scheme raised $34 billion almost instantly, completely reversing the rupee's freefall.
And it works beautifully today, too. Dollars flood in, the currency stabilizes, the headlines look great. But what happens in 3 to 5 years when these deposits mature?
That is the ticking clock. In a few years, all those NRIs will withdraw their principal and their massive subsidized interest, all in U.S. dollars. If the underlying fundamentals of the Indian economy haven't strengthened and exports haven't surged to naturally replenish those dollars,
Then what?
then that sudden massive outflow will be a catastrophic shock to India's forex reserves.
It is financial engineering, basically buying time, but it shows a government actively managing acute economic pressure.
It does.
But what happens when a government completely fails to manage that pressure and instead actively extracts resources from its own people without giving anything back? To see that, we only have to look across the line of control.
We turn now to the severe unrest in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, or POK. On June 8, 2026, massive protests in Rawalakot, the capital of the Poonch district in AJK, resulted in violent clashes with Pakistani security forces. At least 11 people were killed and over 70 injured.
This isn't the standard geopolitical posturing we usually hear about. This is raw, grassroots desperation. The protests were organized by the Jammu Kashmir Joint Awami Action Committee, the JAC. And what fascinates me is that this isn't a separatist militant group.
No, it's not.
It is a coalition of local traders, lawyers, and students. But the Pakistani government immediately banned them under anti-terror laws and deployed federal paramilitary troops. Why the extreme response to civil society?
Because the JAA's demands expose the extractive, colonial nature of Islamabad's administration in AJK. Let's look at the Mangala Dam on the Halem River. This mega dam generates massive amounts of hydroelectric power for Pakistan's national grid, keeping cities like Lahore illuminated.
Okay.
Yet the AJK residents living right next to the dam face severe power cuts. Worse, they're charged exorbitant market rate tariffs upwards of 40 to 50 rupees per unit for electricity generated in their own backyard.
Imagine living next to a massive dam that powers the entire country, but you are sitting in the dark. And when the lights finally flicker on, the government charges you a premium for your own water.
It's tragic irony. The JAC's primary demand is subsidized electricity at 3 rupees per unit, matching what residents in Islamabad pay.
Seems fair.
But the extraction extends to basic food security, too. AJK historically relied on subsidized wheat from the federal government. Over the past 2 years, Islamabad, facing its own IMF-mandated austerity measures, aggressively withdrew that subsidy. Flour prices doubled overnight.
So you have a population whose resources are extracted, their basic food staples made unaffordable, and their political voice deliberately diluted.
Exactly.
Let's talk about that political dilution. I read that there are 12 seats in the AJK Assembly reserved for, quote, Kashmiri refugees, unquote, living in mainland Pakistani cities. How does that mechanism actually work to suppress local power?
It is a brilliant, albeit deeply cynical, tool of proxy control. These 12 seats are elected by voters scattered across Pakistan who are heavily influenced by mainstream Pakistani political parties and the military establishment.
I see.
They invariably vote as a bloc aligned with Islamabad. In a relatively small assembly, this built-in bloc ensures that no purely local grassroots AJK political movement can ever achieve a majority to challenge federal extraction policies.
So how does this internal crisis benefit India's strategic posture? We obviously passed the 1994 parliamentary resolution demanding Pakistan vacate POK. But right now, what is the diplomatic angle?
From an international relations perspective, the instability is highly advantageous for New Delhi. First, it drains Pakistan's military and administrative bandwidth. But more importantly, it deeply compromises the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC.
Right, because India vehemently opposes CPEC since it traverses this disputed territory.
Exactly. The fact that the local residents are actively protesting that they are being impoverished while massive Chinese infrastructure is built over their heads perfectly validates India's narrative that the project is neo-colonial and exploitative.
It is a tragedy of resource allocation. Families in Polk are fighting in the streets over how the burden of survival, the cost of flour, the cost of power is distributed. But when we look at families within India, the burden of survival and family planning is also deeply skewed. Let's look at the staggering findings of the NFHS-6, the National Family Health Survey.
The NFHS-6 data for 2023-2024 presents a very complex picture for Indian society and health under GS Papers 1 and 2. On a macro level, the headlines are a triumph.
How so?
The total contraceptive prevalence rate, the CPR, has climbed to 71.1% among currently married women. This means India is rapidly approaching global high-use standards, and the unmet need for family planning has dropped to 6.5%.
So couples are successfully planning their families. That is excellent for economic stability.
It is.
But then you look at how they are planning, and the gender divide is horrifying. Female sterilization tubectomy accounts for 38.1% of all modern contraceptive use.
Yeah.
It is the single most dominant method in the nation. And male sterilization of vasectomy accounts for what, 0.3%?
It is a profound structural failure. Women are bearing 99.7% of the permanent contraceptive burden.
And I really have to push back here because medically, this makes zero sense. A vasectomy is a 15-minute outpatient procedure. It is cheaper, it is exponentially safer, it doesn't require entering the abdominal cavity.
Culture.
Meanwhile, a tubectomy is major surgery with real recovery time and risks of ectopic pregnancies and infections. The NFHS-6 data clearly states that 94% of Indian men are fully aware of contraceptive methods.
Yes, awareness is very high.
So if it's not an information gap, and it's certainly not a medical advantage, what is the mechanism keeping men out of the clinics? Is it just cultural ego?
The mechanism is a toxic blend of historical trauma and entrenched patriarchy. We have to look back to the 1970s, during the emergency. The state executed aggressive, often forced vasectomy drives.
Oh, right.
The profound psychological trauma of that era created a lasting stigma linking vasectomies to emasculation and state coercion. In the decades since, the state never undertook the massive generational counseling effort required to undo that fear.
So instead of doing the hard work of counseling men and rebuilding that trust, the system just took the path of least resistance and shifted the entire physiological burden onto women.
Exactly. And current policies inadvertently reinforce it. Programs like Mission Parivar Vikas talk about male engagement in their mission statements, but operationally, they are fully integrated into the maternal health infrastructure.
Oh, I see.
The camps, the healthcare workers, the targets, they are all oriented toward female bodies. The state's administrative convenience has effectively institutionalized the patriarchal norm that family planning is exclusively women's work.
It is a devastating micro-level failure of resource and burden planning. But let's look at what happens when macro-level resource planning fails. Imagine you are a farmer in Punjab. Your entire livelihood depends on a 3-week window in June. Let's look at the severe fertilizer shortages crippling the Kharif sowing season.
This brings us to our 9th topic, and it perfectly illustrates the vulnerability of global supply chains. In June 2026, massive protests erupted across Punjab, led by the Samyukta Kisan Morcha.
What were they protesting specifically?
Farmers were blockading district supply depots, desperate for DAP, diammonium phosphate.
We mentioned the butterfly effect earlier. A United States naval blockade in the Middle East means a farmer in Punjab can't plant his paddy in time. Walk me through the mechanics of this crisis. Why is DAP so critical exactly in June? Why can't they just wait a month and apply it later when the shipments arrive?
Because of the agronomy of paddy cultivation, DAP must be applied as a basal dose.
What does that mean?
This means the fertilizer has to be physically incorporated into the soil at the exact moment of seed sowing or transplanting to ensure early root proliferation. If you miss that specific 2 to 3 week window in June, you cannot just top dress it or sprinkle it on the leaves later. The structural development of the plant is stunted, and the overall crop yield is permanently, irreversibly damaged.
Wow. And cooperative societies in Punjab reported having only 40% of their normal allocation. Why? Because India imports 60% of its total DAP requirement, roughly 7 million tons, primarily from Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Morocco.
Now connect the geopolitical dots. To reach the western coast of India from Jordan or Saudi Arabia, those massive bulk cargo ships must transit the Strait of Hormuz or the Red Sea.
And we know what's happening there.
Right. Because of the U.S.-Iran naval conflict we discussed in Section 2, insurance premiums for those routes have become completely unviable. Ships are being forced to reroute all the way down the coast of Africa around the Cape of Good Hope.
That detour adds 14 days of transit time and burns thousands of extra tons of fuel. So the global price of DAP shoots up 35%.
Yeah.
Now, factor in the weak Indian rupee, which we discussed in the RBI segment, making dollar-denominated imports even more expensive.
This creates an impossible mathematical squeeze for Indian fertilizer importers. The government strictly controls the retail price of DAP at 1,350 rupees per bag to shield farmers from inflation. When the global import costs skyrocketed past what they could legally sell it for, private importers simply stopped signing new contracts.
Because they would go bankrupt. Wait, if the global price surges, but the retail price is locked by law, how does the system ever function? What is the nutrient-based subsidy, the NBS, and why didn't prevent this?
Under the nutrient-based subsidy scheme, the government pays the fertilizer companies a fixed subsidy amount per kilogram of nutrient nitrogen, phosphorus, potash to bridge the gap between the high import cost and the low retail price. But the NBS rates are fixed periodically.
So they couldn't adapt fast enough.
Right. The sudden geopolitical shock in early 2026 outpaced the set subsidy rates. To prevent a total collapse of the Kharif season, the cabinet had to urgently convene and approve a massive 25,000 crore rupee supplementary subsidy specifically to absorb the shock for importers. They also ordered IFFCO to run its domestic plants at 110% capacity.
The state is essentially writing massive checks to absorb the collateral damage of a war thousands of miles away. It really shows how import dependence for critical agricultural inputs is a glaring national security vulnerability.
It is. And the long-term structural solution isn't just more subsidies, it is aggressive crop diversification in Punjab. The state needs to transition away from highly fertilizer-intensive crops like paddy and toward millets, oilseeds, and pulses, which require a fraction of the DAP.
The tension in Punjab is a battle between immediate agricultural survival and global maritime conflicts. But in India's final frontier, down in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, there is a literal battle taking place right now. It is a conflict between standardized mainland democratic governance and the survival of ancient indigenous ecosystems. Let's look at our final topic, the debate over Nicobar elections.
This is a quintessential General Studies Paper 2 dilemma regarding governance and tribal rights. Right now, there is a fierce debate over whether to introduce standard panchayat elections in the Nicobar district under the 1994 Act, replacing the existing traditional tribal councils.
On paper, if you just read the headline, bringing democratic panchayat elections to the islands sounds like an absolute positive. It sounds like modernization and enfranchisement.
It does.
But local civil society and the tribal captains are fiercely protesting it. They suspect this democracy is actually a Trojan horse designed to pave the way for the 72,000 crore rupee Galathea Bay project. Let's break down the current governance first. How do the tribal councils operate?
The Nicobari people, and particularly vulnerable tribal groups, or PVTGs like the Shompen, are governed by customary laws under the 1956 Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Regulation. They elect local leaders called captains who manage land rights and resolve disputes based on deeply held traditions, not mainland bureaucratic codes.
And crucially, the islands are protected by the Inner Line Permit, the ILP system.
Yes.
The ILP is basically an administrative shield. It means I, as a mainland Indian citizen, cannot just fly to Great Nicobar, buy a plot of beachfront property, and set up a hotel. It prevents the local ecology and anthropology from being consumed by mainland capital.
Precisely. But mainland capital, driven by immense strategic imperatives, has now arrived. The Galathea Bay project on Great Nicobar Island is staggering in its scope. It includes an international transshipment terminal, a greenfield international airport, a power plant, and a massive township.
Let's talk about the strategic logic first, because it is undeniable. Great Nicobar sits right at the mouth of the Strait of Malacca, which handles a massive percentage of global trade. Building a transshipment port there allows India to capture billions in maritime commerce that currently bypasses us for Colombo or Singapore.
That's the economic side.
And militarily, it allows the Indian Navy to project immense power over the strait, effectively checking Chinese maritime expansion in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
It is a geopolitical masterstroke.
But the ecological and human cost is absolutely devastating. To build this masterstroke, you are clearing thousands of hectares of pristine tropical rainforest. You are building industrial infrastructure directly on top of the primary nesting beaches of the giant leatherback sea turtles.
Oh, man.
And most critically, you are permanently altering the habitat of the Shumpin tribe. We're talking about an uncontacted or minimally contacted PVTG with an estimated surviving population of barely 230 individuals.
So how do panchayat elections tie into building a port? Why does the government care how the locals vote if they just want to build infrastructure?
Because of land acquisition and resource standardization, the customary laws managed by the tribal captains are inherently resistant to massive industrial land handovers.
Oh, I see.
By introducing standardized, mainland-style panchayat governance, critics argue the state is attempting to create a pliable, bureaucratic framework. A panchayat structure makes it legally and administratively much easier for the state to execute compulsory land acquisition, deploy mainland labor, and manage resources than negotiating with autonomous tribal councils operating under 1956 protections.
It is the ultimate collision of priorities. The state has to secure the nation's maritime future in the 21st century, but doing so requires bulldozing the legal and ecological shears of its most vulnerable citizens.
And that brings us full circle. What an incredibly complex landscape we've mapped out today.
We really have. We started by legally valuing the invisible labor of homemakers. We traced the invisible strings of global supply chains, connecting a U.S. naval blockade in Hormuz to a desperately empty fertilizer depot in Punjab.
We did.
We dissected the brilliant high-stakes financial engineering of the RBI defending the rupee. We looked at the constitutional battleground for Dalit converts, the state suffocating NGOs through FCRA receivership, the raw anger and poke over stolen electricity, the silent structural burden women carry in family planning, and the sheer physical audacity of punching a tunnel through the Himalayas at Zuhila. Finally, we look at the geopolitical chess moves threatening the pristine ecosystems of Nicobar.
The threads are all connected by a single prevailing theme, and I want to leave you with a final thought to really mull over.
Go.
We have spent this entire deep dive analyzing different forms of security. The Supreme Court provided economic security for homemakers. The Navy is struggling for maritime security in the Gulf. The RBI engineered currency security. We built a tunnel for strategic security, and we desperately need fertilizer for food security.
Right.
But look closely at the outcomes. The Shumpin tribe facing a megaport. Indian seafarers dodging missiles in Hormuz. AJK residents protesting a dam that takes their water but leaves them in the dark. In every instance, one system's security is almost always another system's existential threat. As a future policymaker, or just a well-informed citizen, ask yourself, in the hyper-connected 21st century, is it even legally or structurally possible to fully secure a nation without fundamentally destabilizing something else in the process?
That is a profound question, and exactly the kind of critical thinking we want you to carry with you into your exams and your life. Thank you so much for joining us for this 3D initiative. I hope this deep dive into the June 12 sources helped clarify the beautiful, chaotic complexity of the world we are all trying to navigate. Keep reading the sources, keep pushing back on the easy answers, and above all, keep questioning the world around you. We'll be right here, ready to unpack it with you again. Take care.